Hey everybody, welcome here to Musicians Edition. I'm Evan on the guitar, and in this video we're going to be diving into effect pedals. So effect pedals, I haven't put too much out there about guitar effects and pedals, so I wanted to do an introduction into what pedals you should prioritize if you're a beginner looking to get into these, and as well as I'll go over all the common types of effect pedals you could be looking at. And I'll either show you what they do to your tone and your guitar sound, either with the pedals that I have or with some digital effects that I have, so you can see how each of them will affect your sound, so you can see which ones you might want to prioritize, depending on the style and type of sound you want to add to your guitar. So by now you have an electric guitar and you have an amplifier, and what we can do is we can add these extra effects that are going to go between the guitar and the amp. That could be one pedal that can do a myriad of things, or we can put multiple pedals chained together that's going to help boost our sound in different ways. And depending on the order of these pedals and what effects we dial in, we can get some pretty creative combinations that give us a much wider variety to what kind of tone and sounds we can get out of our guitars. When you do have quite a few chained together, it's common to use these things called patch cables, which are just really short versions of these long cables you use to connect your guitar. Makes it much easier, so there's less clutter and less messy space there. So those are common when you're using chained ones. Otherwise, make sure you do have enough of these kinds of cables depending on the amount of pedals you are going to be using. Pedals also need power, just like your amplifier and your electric guitar does. We need some power. So some pedals might have a 9-volt battery inside of them that powers them. Some offer an option of the battery or a power source, and some just make you plug in a power source. So it's a good idea to get one of these 9-volt battery power sources like we have here. This is pretty much one that I have that has multiple hooks, so you can plug it into multiple different pedals. So if you're looking to get at least a few pedals, it's good to get one of these kinds of power sources. You can just plug in and plug into each one of those there. Especially when you do have chains of these pedals, if just one pedal is off, the power or input or output or something is wrong with it, then that's going to cause no signal to get to our amplifier. So make sure you do check each pedal in your chain to see which one is that weak link or where you might have messed up. Sometimes I forget to plug one in, or one of the cables isn't in all the way and I get nothing to my amp. So make sure you are checking those when putting together these chains. And now for what to prioritize. So the effects pedals you want to prioritize obviously just depends on the style of music you want to play. Some pedals are really popular in certain styles but not used at all in others. So it really depends widely on the type of music you play and the type of tone you're looking to get out of your guitar, which I know isn't too helpful, but a good tool to just get familiar with what is commonly used by your favorite guitarists and in your genres is there's this website called equipboard.com that just lets you type in the name of your favorite guitarists, and you can see what gear that they use, including their effects pedals. So you can see, do they use distortion, overdrive, do they use delays, reverbs, and what kinds do they use, and then you can see if they use any kinds of modulators as well. And that's a good starting point to see what kind of effects are typically used in the music that you listen to. All right, and then as well, you have an amplifier, and an amplifier often has stock effects, effects that are built into it. And so, for example, I have a Boss Katana, and I have a pretty good amount of effects that are on this thing already. I can plug in delay and reverb. I can do some boosts, some modulators. And so pretty much whatever your amp offers, you want to hold off on getting those at least for your first round of buying pedals. So if your amp has reverb and delay, the reverb and delay on there is good enough to give you an idea of what these do and get you playing around with it, that you do not need to go out and buy a reverb or delay pedal yet. Same with a certain type of modulator. If you have a chorus, phaser, flanger, any of those things on your amp, then you probably don't need to buy those types of modulation pedals either. So you're pretty much going to prioritize what your amp does not have in your first round of buying, and then as you get familiar with effects and get an idea of where your tone's at and what you're missing, you can upgrade from those stock effects on your amp, or even go for the upgraded pedals from what you bought the first round as well too. So we're typically going to prioritize shaping our tone And our tone is shaped by gain type effects, distortions, compression, fuzz, overdrive, EQ. Those things are really going to shape the sound that we get. And then the extra fun things of modulators, reverb, delay are added on top of that. But again, if your amp already has those things, don't really worry about getting those pedals yet. We're going to focus mostly on getting our tone and then that other fun stuff. If your amp doesn't have it, you can get a cheap pedal that takes care of it or does even a few things. There's multi-effects pedals that can have chorus, tremolo, phaser, all that built into one that gives you a good idea of what is out there for your guitar sound. So whether you are getting the effects from your amp or from pedals, the effects you definitely want to have for sure are those gain type effects. Gain type effects are things that boost your playing, and that is going to get you some of that fuzz that you hear in hard rock music. But we can be talking about compressors, distortion, overdrive, fuzz, EQ even fits into this as well too. These are really core effects that you do need to shape your sound. Then we always want those atmosphere filling effects that make us sound better than what we are, especially for just getting started. So those are going to be delay and reverb. You do want those. Those are used in a really wide variety of genres. So whether you have it on your amp or your pedals, make sure you do have access to delay and reverb. And then the modulators are really just up to personal preference. So we're talking about choruses, phasers, wahs, any of those things that modulate the sound of your guitar. Some are used quite frequently in certain genres and then just not touched at all in others. So it depends really on your style of music. If you're playing funk, it's good to have some modulators because they're really popular in there. But if you're playing hard rock, not quite as much. You'll see some of those pop up in some songs, but really not as much of a necessity. But they really do add a nice unique sound to your playing. So if you think you will use it and it is used in the music you want to play, then go for it. They're really fun to add on. So we've got those gain pedals, we've got those time-based atmosphere-filling ones, we've got modulators, and the last category to talk about is going to be functional pedals. So functional pedals, we're talking about tools for us that are more on the technical side that do not affect our tone but are just useful. And what I mean here is most commonly we're talking about tuners and loopers. Tuners, they're handy. You can get it for $30-$40 or something like that. You can plug it in, it'll help make sure each of your strings are in tune so you're never out of tune. Staying in tune is important, but also you can just get a free phone app that works as a tuner as well too. If you really like the convenience of the pedal tuner, sure, you might find it useful, but for me, I just still use my phone, so that's always a good option. Loopers, I do recommend though. Loopers are really fun, and they can really help work on your playing skills. All you do with it, and I have one of these as well too, this loop station is the one that I have. What you can do is you press the pedal, it records whatever you play, and then you can stop it and it'll loop that back over and over. So you can record like a 4-bar loop of strumming or an 8-bar loop, your typical chord patterns that you're going to be looping, and you can play a riff or a solo over that, or I can switch over to my bass and throw a bass line over it. I can chill and sing over this guitar part I played and hear it over and over. And even some of these will have drum tracks included in it, so you can really create an entire track just in these looper pedals. So I find them to be really useful. And also sometimes I'll just play this loop and then mess with my effects afterwards in the chain to really dial in my tone for whatever I want. So I do find those ones really useful. So we do have a lot of options as far as these pedals go. There's so many out there, so many different brands out there. And we're, again, talking about which ones we prioritize. We're going to talk about the chaining order of them here as well, too. So when you see the chain of pedals, it's usually viewed what looks to be backwards, right to left. And that's just because of where the inputs versus the outputs are on these things. The inputs are on the right side, and then the outputs are on the left. So we go from right to left because of that. So we start from our guitar, which is going to be really on like the far right of our chain. We plug that into the input of the first one on the right, and then connect, and then we ended up into the amp there. So for the order, gain type effects usually go first. You want to shape your tone first before you add any of those more unique, crazier effects. So that's going to be your compressor, your overdrive, your distortion are usually going to come first. And then after that, in the middle of your chain, you can have your modulating effects if you are adding some of those. So the chorus, coming after the gain type effects, or tremolo, or the phasers coming after those, any of those modulators. And then we're going to finish it off with the time-based effects that come next of reverb and delay. And then we can go into our amp after that. This is not a rule book. These can get changed depending on what you're doing, but this is a common, guideline that's typically followed of gain to modulation to those time-based effects. So that's pretty much it for getting into these and what the categories of pedals are out there. I'm going to go ahead and throw a loop on and put it through the different types of effects so you can hear how each one is going to affect it. So we'll look at gain type pedals first. There is debate on, which kind you should prioritize getting of overdrive versus distortion versus fuzz. So we'll hear how each of those affects our sound. We'll also hear a compressor and some EQ as well, so we can hear how those affect our sound. You might have one or multiple of these gain type effects put together, a compressor with a distorter or a distortion with a fuzz, depending on what you're going for. Usually the distortion and fuzz are seen as the more hard rock, pushing your guitar sound to the limit type, whereas overdrive is the most mild out of those three. So I use overdrive because I don't play a whole lot of hard rock, but it can get me a decent amount of, fuzz and distortion sound when I do want it, but then it also gives me a nice cleaner boost without going full on fuzz. So that's one that I prefer. But we'll hear how each of these affects the sound here. All right, so I have a 4-chord loop I played on my electric guitar, put it into the looper pedal, and then I'm going to turn on each of these effects either with my pedals or I'm going to use the digital effects I have, and we're going to see how each of them is going to affect the tone here. So here is the loop first with no effects, just straight into the amp. Okay, so gain type effects first. Let's start with just a little compression. Compression is the least noticeable of these gain type effects. You're not gonna hear crackling with it. What we're doing really is just kind of leveling the playing field of our sound. So we're gonna make it so, when we play, we have some that's played at a higher volume and some that comes off a bit quieter when you hear it all together. What we're gonna do is kind of level it all out a bit so it meets more in the middle. So the really quiet parts go a little bit louder. The too loud parts that's louder than everything else are gonna shrink down a little bit. So we're gonna get a more of a level playing field with this. So you're not gonna hear the crackling, it's more just pushing the sound a little bit, all to be around the same volume. These are commonly layered with distortion because you want a compressor usually coming before your distortion so you can boost your guitar playing and have that always punch through so the fuzz of the distortion never really overtakes your guitar sound. So that's a common pairing together of compression with distortion or fuzz or whatever. But anyway, here is what a little bit of compression sounds like. All right, and now we will move on to the 3 options for adding some fuzz or distortion here. That's going to be overdrive, distortion, and then fuzz. So overdrive we'll hear first. I have one of these. I use this Archer pedal. It's a Klon clone. These are really common for overdrives because a Klon pedal is kind of legendary for a guitar because it gives you a really clean boost and then you can add the amount of grittiness you want to add on top of that. So a lot of pedals try to imitate that sound. So with my overdrive, I can go from really clean boost or, add as much of that grittiness as I want on top of it. So here is a little bit of overdrive. So regular. Here's some overdrive. I can adjust my fuzz. Or go nice and clean. All right, and that is my overdrive. it is the mildest of all these, just adding a bit of grittiness to your sound. The next one we'll look at is regular distortion. So distortion simulates the sound of the guitar pushing really hard against the amp and starting to cause that crackling sound. With distortion, you can always adjust the presence of it, how hard or intense that crackling is really going to be. But here is some plain old distortion added onto that loop. All right, our next one for these is going to be fuzz. Fuzz, you typically are getting more of the kind of like distorted fuzzy sound, but it's more tightly controlled in this. In distortion, it can kind of vary of, breaking versus not breaking so hard. Fuzz is kind of like a consistent, more controlled fuzzy sound added onto the guitar. Sometimes we'll pair fuzz with distortion or overdrive so we can start to push it and then kind of control that fuzz a little bit. So yeah, here's a little fuzz added onto that one. And lastly, let's look at some EQ. EQ is a bit more unique from these because it doesn't just boost, it also, sculpts your sound because you can reduce some areas and increase others. The common EQs are like the ones that are probably on your amplifier of like a low, mid, high. So obviously we can increase or decrease each of those set of frequencies, the low, the mid, the high, and see how that adjusts our sound. You can get EQs that get a bit more creative and have, multi-bands. Instead of just low, mid, high, might be split up into 5, 6, or 8 kind of frequencies. So you can more fine-tune and sculpt your sound. So yeah, EQs can be used in a lot of different ways. It can be put really anywhere kind of in your chain, depending on what you're using it for. But yeah, here's one example of what EQ can add. And now let's look at our modulators so you can hear what each of those do for you. You might be on the fence of phaser, chorus, or tremolo pedals or whatever. I really do recommend, if you're just getting into this, get a multi-effects pedal. It can really show you what all these options are and give you an idea what they do. And then if you want to upgrade one to that's solely dedicated to one of those that you are really liking and using a lot of, you can do that later on. So I've got this White Wizard multi-effects pedal. I'm going to flip through the different presets it has so you can hear how each of them affects the sound. So you'll hear phaser, chorus, tremolo, all that stuff, and hear how it's going to affect the guitar here. All right, so first is going to be chorus, and chorus is going to simulate a sound as if there's multiple guitars playing at once to kind of like fill the space. And it can really sound interesting. You can get this kind of lush sound, or you can get more of like a warbled kind of sound to it, So here's chorus. So from chorus, I will go to a flanger next. This is kind of similar to a phaser where it adds kind of like a psychedelic washing effect to your guitar, an extra kind of layer like that on top of it. So here's that flanger. I feel like this one's kind of doing a lot. All right, next up. Here is a phaser, really similar to our previous one, another psychedelic kind of effect added onto it, commonly used in like the 70s and 80s, but pops up, in funk especially, I think. All right, and next, here's our tremolo. And what this one does is you can adjust the rate and kind of depth of a high volume, then a low volume, and kind of going back and forth, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down with your sound. You can adjust the speed of those up and downs and how intense they are. So I'm kind of just adjusting the speed of it there. All right, and the last one we'll show is going to be a wah pedal. So this is an auto wah because this is usually one you're going to control in real time with your foot. And you can make it kind of like a voice where you're kind of rocking the treble back and forth to make it sound like a voice. So here's an auto wah that's doing that automatically for me. All right, and that's it for our modulators here. We're gonna finish off with just these time-based ones. So for these delay and reverb, I've just got these on my amplifier, so I'll just give you a quick demo in case you're not familiar with these. So this is just what it looks like on my amp. I can just dial it up and down, and I can press a button to change the type of delay and reverb, and it'll kind of like change the tone of how it sounds for each of them. You can get pedals for these. You can use digital effects for these that let you get a bit more creative, of course, too. But if your amp has it, it's a great tool to use. Mine's also got a tap in for the delay, so I can like tap in the tempo I want the delay to be hitting at. So delay, you know, we're just getting echoes, echo, oh, oh, and I can change the distance between each of those echoes, and I can change the intensity of I want loud echoes or quiet echoes, depending on if I want like ambient or more like slap back kind of delay. And then reverb, you get echoes, but they're all kind of mixed together and swarm together to just get this, you know, atmospheric sound of like filling up the space. So these two are kind of like a little secret sauce to make you sound better than you are, because it can make it sound like you're playing extra hits or really just, you know, kind of filling up that atmosphere here. So let's hear a little bit of delay onto this. All right, and that's our delay. Kind of easier to hear and pick apart if you're playing more open hits of just dun, 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 and you can kind of hear all that come through. All right, so reverb is gonna be our next one. We can hear how this one sounds. So here's our loop. Let's add a bit of reverb to it. All right, so there's those two. Always, you know, really common across a lot of genres, delay or reverb. I'm often fine with what my amp offers. If I need something more creative, I'll pull up the digital effects. I used to have a delay pedal, but I was like, I don't even understand why I have this, because I can just so much easily just like use the amp or the digital effects. But you know, there's ones out there that do offer a lot of creativity that you can always look into for either of those two, even if your amp does have those. And those are all of our effects. This is a long one, I know, so I hope this was a lot of information to help get you going and give you a better idea of what is out there as far as pedals. You know, prioritizing what you need depending on what your amp has, what your style is, shaping your tone, and I hope this gave you a good idea of the different kinds of effects that you can use and how they will affect your guitar sound between those gain types, those modulators, those time-based, and also gave you some ideas of those functional pedals and what those do as well too. So have fun playing around with those effects and buying those pedals, and we'll see you next time.